Okay, picture this. It's night. There's a fierce summer storm raging, the kind that makes creeks roar like rivers. Then, in the middle of all that chaos, a crash. A sound that cuts through the storm and, well, changes everything.
That's exactly where we're starting today. A really dramatic night back in 1881. We're doing a deep dive into the story of the Kate Shelley Bridge, and it's fascinating because it's really two stories woven together.
Two
Yeah.
stories.
First, you've got this incredible act of heroism by a young girl, Kate Shelley, who the bridge is named after.
Yeah.
And then there's the engineering story, this just monumental feat of building what was, when it was finished, the longest and tallest double-track railroad bridge anywhere in the world.
Right. So, our mission for you today is to unpack all that using our sources. We've got this great historical booklet made for Union Pacific Railroad about the bridge's construction. And we're going to pull out some really surprising details, about 19th century courage, the huge engineering hurdles they faced in the early 1900s, and something that really stood out to me how workplace safety has changed so dramatically.
Oh, absolutely. The safety aspect is stark.
So, this deep dive. It's your shortcut to getting genuinely clued in on this amazing slice of American history, engineering, and sheer human grit.
Let's jump into that first story then. Kate Shelley's courage on that night. So it's 1881. Kate Shelley is just 15 years old. She lives near Honey Creek in Boone County, Iowa, with her mom, who was a widow, and her four younger siblings.
And it wasn't just any summer, right? It had been really wet.
Extremely wet, so the creeks, like Honey Creek, were already running dangerously high, swollen.
Okay, so conditions are already bad. Then the storm hits.
Exactly. A massive thunderstorm rolls in on July 6th. Around 10 o'clock at night, the railroad sends out what they called a pusher engine from Moingona Station. Just an engine and crew, basically, to check the tracks ahead.
Uh-oh. They didn't know about the bridge.
They had no idea. Storm debris had already badly damaged the wooden bridge over Honey Creek. When the engine hit that spot, it just plunged straight into the raging creek.
Oh, terrible. What happened to the crew?
It was tragic. The fireman, a man named Amos Pope Olmsted, was killed. They actually never recovered his body. The engineer, though, he survived the initial crash, but was trapped in the wreckage with the floodwaters rising.
Just terrifying. And Kate Shelley, this 15-year-old girl, how does she even figure out what's happened?
Well, she was in her house nearby, and she heard the crash over the storm. But crucially, she also heard something else, that distinct hiss of a steam boiler escaping into the creek.
Ah, that specific sound.
That's what triggered it. She knew something was wrong with the train, so she grabbed a lantern, a coat, and just ran out into the storm to see what it was.
Finds the wreck, sees the trapped engineer, but realizes she can't possibly rescue him by herself in these conditions.
Right. But then, almost immediately, she realizes something far, far worse.
The other train.
The Atlantic Express.
Yeah.
The big passenger train. She knew it was scheduled to leave Moingona Station at 11:27 p.m., and it carried about 300 passengers. It would be heading straight for this washed-out bridge. Hundreds of lives were hanging in the balance.
Wow. The pressure on her in that moment. So what does she do?
She makes this incredibly brave call. She has to get to Moingona Station to warn them. But here's the thing. To get there, she first has to cross the big bridge over the Des Moines River.
In the storm, in the dark.
In the storm, in the dark. And the railroad, the CNNW, had actually removed the wooden planks from the walkway on that bridge. They didn't want people using it as a shortcut.
So, no walkway. How did she even cross?
Her lantern blew out almost immediately.
Yeah.
She had to get down on her hands and knees and crawl across the railroad ties.
Crawl. 100 feet above a flooding river.
Yes, with only the flashes of lightning to give her any sense of where she was. Imagine crawling across those open ties, feeling the bridge shake from the wind and the river roaring below.
I can't even fathom that level of bravery. Did you make it?
She did. She finally stumbled into the station, completely soaked, bruised, exhausted, but she got the warning out. Honey Creek Bridge is gone.
And the Atlantic Express.
They held it. All those passengers were saved. They also sent a rescue party back immediately and managed to save the trapped engineer from the first wreck.
Amazing. She must have become famous overnight, right?
Absolutely. News spread like wildfire. She got national publicity. The tributes started pouring in. The state of Iowa gave her a medal. The Chicago Tribune actually raised money and funded a new house for her family in 1890.
That's wonderful. And the railroad itself.
Well, fast forward a bit to May 1901. The New York Times, the Railway and Engineering Review, they both reported the CNNW Railroad intended to name their huge new steel bridge after her.
The Kate Shelley Bridge.
The Kate Shelley Bridge. And, fittingly, in 1903, the railroad hired Kate herself. She became a station agent right there in Moingona. She worked there until shortly before she passed away in 1912. Her legacy was secure, but it was about to become physically monumental.
Right, because her heroism really becomes the sort of the human anchor for this next phase, this massive engineering project. Building the Kate Shelley Bridge itself, which
Yeah.
you said at the start of the 20th century was a huge deal.
Oh, one of the biggest. When it was completed, it was celebrated as the longest, tallest double-track railroad bridge on the planet. It became an instant icon of engineering power.
So why build such a monster bridge there? What was the need? Let's get into that historical context you mentioned.
Okay, so the original railroad line there, its roots go back to the Cedar Rapids and Missouri River Railroad Company, the CR&MR, chartered way back in 1856. It was one of those early land grant railroads, you know, given federal land to encourage westward expansion. It actually became the first railroad to cross the entire state of Iowa, finished in 1867.
And eventually became part of the Chicago and Northwestern, the CN&W.
Exactly, through mergers and acquisitions over time.
Okay, so what was wrong with the original CN&W line between Boone and Ogden that this new bridge was meant to fix?
Problems. Big problems for running a railroad efficiently. That old 11.3-mile stretch, almost half of it, 5.8 miles, was curves, sharp curves.
Wow, half the distance on curves.
Yeah, and steep grades. Like, heading west, there was one stretch over 4 miles long that climbed 205 feet.
Okay, I'm not a railroad engineer, but that sounds difficult.
It was a nightmare. It meant they often needed extra helper engines just to push or pull trains up those grades. That cost time, fuel, manpower, serious money, and delays.
So the new route, the Boone-Ogden cutoff they called it, was designed to fix all that.
Precisely. It wasn't just about a bridge. It was about straightening and flattening the line. The cutoff shaved off about 3 miles in distance. But more importantly, it slashed the curves down to less than half a mile total. And the grades. That big westbound climb went from 205 feet down to just 47 feet over about 2.5 miles.
Huge difference. No more helper engines needed.
Exactly. It smoothed out operations, saved a ton of money, and allowed them to double-track the whole section, which was vital for handling increasing traffic. It really set a new standard.
So designing this thing, how did that happen?
Well, the CN&W's own engineer of bridges, Mr. W.H. Finley, did the initial surveys and plans back in 1898. Then, interestingly, they brought in a consulting firm from New York City to revise and finalize the designs.
And the materials, where did all that steel come from?
The steel itself was manufactured by Carnegie Steel in Pittsburgh. A lot of steel. But the fabrication, actually assembling the pieces, that was a massive job, spread across multiple companies. Union Bridge Company, other firms in Pittsburgh, but also Milwaukee and Chicago.
Our sources called it one of the largest fabrication projects of its kind in the nation at the time. Just coordinating that must have been complex.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. No computers, no instant communication like today. It was a huge logistical feat, pioneering methods for large-scale project coordination.
And construction starts when?
Kicks off in the fall of 1899. Mr. W.C. Armstrong, another CN&W engineer, was in charge on the ground.
Let's talk scale again. How big are we talking?
Okay, the total crossing, including the big earthen embankments at each end, is about 3,000 feet. The steel structure itself is 2,685 feet long. It's 27 feet wide, enough for 2 tracks, and at its highest point over the Des Moines River, 185 feet tall.
185 feet. That's tall, especially for 1900. How did they even start building something like that?
First came what they called the Big Fill. They had to build up these enormous earthen embankments leading up to where the steel structure would start.
How much fill?
An incredible amount, something like 223,000 cubic yards of earth and rock. This actually shortened the amount of steel bridge they needed to build.
And how did they move all that material back then?
Pretty much the hard way. Lots of temporary wooden trestles and armies of workers using horse-drawn wagons, just endless scooping and hauling, manual labor on a massive scale.
Okay, so the approaches are built up. What's next?
Site prep. Clearing the land, obviously. They built a temporary wooden bridge across the river just to move materials back and forth. And they laid down a special inclined railway track on the valley slope to haul the really heavy stuff, stone blocks, steel beams, up to the construction level.
Clever. Now the foundations, especially for those huge towers holding up the main river span, how did they build those in the river?
Right, that's where things get really interesting. They use something called pneumatic caissons.
Pneumatic caissons. Sounds very high-tech for the time. Break that down.
Okay, so imagine a huge steel cylinder, like an upside-down cup, made of thick, riveted steel plates. These are the caissons. They'd lower these onto the riverbed. Then, they pumped compressed air into the cylinder, enough air pressure to physically push the water out from the bottom, leaving a dry space underneath.
So workers could go down inside.
Exactly. They'd enter through airlocks, go down into this pressurized workspace at the bottom of the riverbed, and start digging, mostly by hand picks and shovels.
Working underwater, but in a bubble of air, how deep did they go?
They had to sink these things down about 42 to 46 feet below the riverbed to hit stable ground.
And the air pressure, that must have been intense.
It could get up to 23 pounds per square inch above normal atmospheric pressure, which we don't know can cause serious health problems, the bends, but they were still learning about that then.
Wow, how long did that take?
Digging was slow, especially in harder layers, maybe only 2 feet a day sometimes, but faster initially. They got all the main caissons for the river towers installed between February and June of 1900.
Incredible, just digging by hand in those conditions. What about the piers, the other supports?
Those were mostly built on foundations above the waterline. They used big rectangular blocks of limestone, Mankato limestone, set in Portland cement mortar. The foundations for those piers varied. Some were on concrete beds. Others, especially closer to the river, were built on top of driven wooden piles for support.
Okay, foundations are in. Then comes the steel. You mentioned Carnegie steel. How much steel are we talking about?
A staggering amount. The bridge structure itself used 5,680 tons of steel.
Tons.
Yeah, plus another 400 tons just in the foundation reinforcement. So total, over 6,000 tons of metal.
And this is all soft steel, riveted together.
Mostly, yes. Soft steel, which was standard then, joined by hundreds of thousands of 7/8-inch diameter rivets, heated red hot, hammered into place. The design itself was state-of-the-art. Huge H-shaped columns for the towers. They used worn girder bracing that triangular pattern you often see, which is really strong and efficient. And 4 massive parallel girders, 7 feet deep, running the length to support the tracks.
There's one detail in our source that I found fascinating, the false work for the river span.
Yeah, yes, the false work.
It says the main 300-foot span over the river was the only part that needed temporary wooden supports built underneath it during assembly.
That's right, because it was too long to build out cantilever style from the piers. So they had to erect this huge, temporary wooden structure in the river channel first.
And then what happened to all that wood afterwards? Did they just scrap it?
No, and this shows how resourceful they were. Once the steel span was complete and self-supporting, they carefully dismantled that entire wooden falsework structure. And then they floated the timber downstream on the Des Moines River to be reused on other construction projects. Nothing wasted.
That's brilliant, actually. Very efficient. So the bridge is built. How do they know it's safe?
Testing. Rigorous testing. They took locomotives, coupled them to cars heavily loaded with sand to maximize the weight. They ran these trains onto the bridge at high speed, then they'd reverse them, get them going fast again, and slam on the emergency brakes, trying to stop within just 60 feet.
Putting maximum stress on the structure.
Exactly. They started with 1 engine, then did it with 2 engines side by side on the double tracks.
Man, it held.
Passed with flying colors. No problems. So the very next day, May 19th, 1901, they opened the bridge for general railroad traffic.
And its status at the time was?
Unmatched. It was widely reported as the longest double-track railroad bridge of its height and the heaviest metal structure of its specific class anywhere in the world. A true engineering landmark.
But building that landmark, that brings us to the human side again. The workers. And this is where reading the sources, the contrast with today just leaps out.
It really does. You look at the photographs taken during construction, and the first thing that hits you is, well, the almost complete lack of safety gear.
Yeah, no hard hats, no safety harnesses, despite working at incredible heights, no eye protection for riveting. Nothing we'd consider basic today.
Nothing. And something else you notice in some photos, though it's not always obvious, is how young some of the workers look.
Our source mentions that there was basically no legal prohibition against employing boys maybe as young as 10, even in dangerous jobs like this back in 1900. Is that right?
That's tragically correct. Child labor laws, comprehensive safety regulations, they just didn't exist in the way we understand them now.
So injuries must have been common.
Routine. Injuries were just seen as part of the job. And deaths. Sadly, not uncommon on projects of this scale. And if you got hurt, your options were really limited. You could try to sue the company for damages, but those lawsuits almost never succeeded back then. Workers had very little protection or recourse.
The statistics you mentioned earlier really hammer this home. Can you share those again?
Yeah, they're stark. In the year 1900, across the U.S., 2,550 railroad workers were killed on the job.
2,500.
Compared to just 56 in 1999. And for coal mining, Another dangerous industry, almost 1,500 miners killed in 1900 versus 35 in 1999.
It's just a world of difference. It really makes you pause and think about the human cost built into structures like the Kate Shelley Bridge.
Absolutely. And beyond safety, the general working conditions were tough. Large companies like the railroad often set up work camps on site. They'd feed and house the workers, but then deduct the cost of room and board from their pay.
So you're living right there, working long hours.
Very long hours, 10, maybe 12 hours a day was typical, and usually a 6-day work week.
And the pay, how did that compare?
Well, average per capita income in the U.S. around 1900 was about $4,200 a year. If you figure a 60-hour week, that's maybe $1.30 an hour, roughly. But many manual laborers, especially after deductions for room and board, likely took home less than that. Compare that to 1999, average income around $33,700 a year, maybe $16.20 an hour for a standard 40-hour week.
It really puts the sheer effort and, frankly, the sacrifice involved in building something like this into perspective.
Definitely gives you an appreciation for modern labor standards.
Okay, so the bridge is built, it's operational. Let's track its life and legacy. You mentioned it was strategically important.
Hugely important. It was a key link in the National Rail Network. So much so that during World War I, it was guarded by U.S. Army soldiers. We actually have photos from April 1917 showing National Guard troops camping nearby, armed with Springfield rifles, specifically to prevent sabotage.
Wow, guarded by the Army.
And again during World War II. That tells you how vital this connection was considered for the war effort and the national economy.
But as the 20th century rolled on, trains got bigger, heavier. Did the bridge keep up?
That became the issue. The very success of the railroad started to strain the bridge. Trains got much heavier, longer, and traffic increased dramatically. By the 1950s, the Grand Old Bridge was showing its age. They had to impose speed restrictions for trains crossing it.
Slowing things down.
And eventually it got to the point where they could only allow one train to cross at a time, even though it was built for 2 tracks.
Ah, so it became a bottleneck, just like the old route it replaced.
Exactly. A major bottleneck for the CNNW and later for Union Pacific after they acquired the CNNW in 1995. The bridge that solved one bottleneck had become one itself.
So inevitably, they had to think about replacing it.
By the late 1990s, the decision was made. Time for a modern structure. Construction started in 2007 on a brand new concrete double-track bridge right next to the original steel one, a $43 million project.
Running parallel to the old one.
Right alongside it, the first Union Pacific train crossed that new bridge on August 20th, 2009.
So what happened to the original Kate Shelley Bridge? Did they tear it down?
No.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, a wonderful part of the story. The original steel bridge, though it's not used for trains anymore, was left standing right next to its modern concrete successor.
So they stand side by side. That must be quite a sight.
It really is. It's a powerful visual contrast. You see the massive, almost muscular look of the old riveted steel structure from 1901, right next to the sleek, modern concrete design from 2009.
A physical timeline of bridge engineering.
Exactly. It perfectly demonstrates how railroad engineering, materials, construction, safety, how everything evolved over a century. But maybe more importantly, having that original bridge still standing there serves as this constant physical reminder.
Or a reminder of Kate Shelley.
A reminder of that 15-year-old girl's incredible bravery on that stormy night in 1881, risking everything to save strangers. Her individual courage is forever linked to that massive, collective feat of engineering.
It really has been an incredible journey we've taken today. From, like you said, that single act of heroism, giving a name to this engineering marvel, then diving into the sheer difficulty, the danger, the ingenuity of actually building it back then, and seeing how its role changed over a century, becoming this vital piece of national infrastructure.
It makes you think, doesn't it, about how much we just take for granted with modern infrastructure, the bridges we drive over, the tunnels, the railways. Behind almost every single one, there's likely a hidden story. Stories of clever design, incredible effort, maybe facing down dangers we barely consider today.
And perhaps, sometimes sparked by an individual moment of heroism, just like Kate Shelley's story became tied to her bridge.
Exactly. So maybe the thought to leave you with is this. What other structures are around you, seemingly ordinary, that might hold equally deep, compelling stories of ingenuity, effort, and maybe even heroism if we just knew where to look?